Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that you are no longer yourself. Your body is different, your abilities are gone, your entire world suddenly looks unfamiliar, and the one creature you have always considered your natural enemy is now the only one who can help you survive. That is exactly the nightmare that turns into an unbelievable adventure in Swapped, a 2026 animated fantasy comedy from Skydance Animation and Netflix. The story follows Ollie, a tiny woodland creature who has always struggled to find his place in the valley, and Ivy, a proud and powerful bird who sees creatures like Ollie as nothing more than food. But when a strange magical accident changes their bodies, the two enemies are forced into an alliance neither of them ever wanted. Suddenly, Ollie has to survive in Ivy's body while Ivy is trapped in Ollie's tiny form, and the only way to return to normal is to understand the strange world they have both taken for granted. The movie is directed by Nathan Greno, best known for directing Tangled, and features the voices of Michael B. Jordan as Ollie, Juno Temple as Ivy, and Tracy Morgan as Booville. The film was released on Netflix in May 2026 and runs for roughly 100 minutes. The story begins in a beautiful but dangerous place, known simply as the Valley, an ecosystem where animals, plants, and strange creatures exist in ways that are completely different from the ordinary world. Every species has its own role, its own territory, and its own rules for survival. Among these creatures are the pukus, a small woodland species that lives together and depends on special food called piplets. For the pukus, the piplets are more than just a meal. They are an important part of their way of life, and losing them could put the entire community in danger. Ollie is one of the smallest members of this species, but despite his size, he has always possessed something that makes him different from everyone else. He is curious. He wants to understand the world beyond the safe boundaries his family has created for him. His father, Kalu, constantly warns him that the valley is full of danger and that certain creatures should never be trusted. But Ollie has never been very good at following those rules. When Ollie was younger, his curiosity led him to encounter a Javan bird named Ivy. The two creatures were supposed to be enemies, but instead of immediately attacking her, Ollie made a surprising decision. He showed Ivy how to open and eat the piplets. To Ollie, it was simply an innocent act of kindness. He had no idea that this small decision would eventually create a huge problem for his entire community. Ivy returned to her own kind and showed them what she had learned. Before long, the Javans began taking the piplets for themselves, leaving the Pukus with fewer and fewer supplies. What Ollie believed was a simple act of friendship slowly became the reason his own people were struggling. Instead of receiving praise for being kind, Ollie finds himself blamed for what happened. The situation forces him to realize that even a good intention can create consequences when you do not understand the world around you. Desperate to fix his mistake, Ollie decides that he must somehow stop the Javans from taking any more piplets. His plan is simple: scare them away and protect what remains for his people. But the valley is not a place where simple plans usually work. When Ollie encounters the Javans again, tensions quickly rise and Ivy becomes involved. She is stronger, larger, and far more confident than Ollie, but she is also dealing with pressure from her own family and her own place within the Javan community. The confrontation between Ollie and Ivy becomes chaotic, and neither of them realizes that something much stranger is about to happen. During the struggle, Ollie suddenly falls into a mysterious hole. At the bottom, he discovers something that looks completely out of place in the natural environment, a strange magical pod. Before Ollie can understand what it is, the pod reacts to him. A powerful transformation takes place, and when Ollie finally wakes up, he realizes that something is terribly wrong. His body has changed. He is no longer the tiny Puku he has known his entire life. Instead, he has become a Javan. He now has Ivy's kind of body with completely different abilities, senses, and physical limitations. At first, Ollie is horrified. He cannot understand how this happened or how he can possibly change back. But then he notices another magical pod nearby, and for a moment it seems like his problem may have an easy solution. Ollie rushes toward the pod, believing that touching it might restore his original body. But before he can reach it, Ivy arrives. She sees the strange object and touches it first. The magical energy activates again, and suddenly Ivy is transformed into a Puku. In a matter of seconds, the two natural enemies have become each other. Ollie is trapped in the body of the bird he once feared, while Ivy is trapped inside the tiny body of the creature she once considered prey. Neither of them understands what has happened, and neither is willing to accept the situation. Their first instinct is to blame each other, but the deeper they move into the valley, the more obvious it becomes that arguing will not solve anything. For the first time, Ollie is forced to experience life from Evie's perspective. He discovers that being a Javan is not as easy as he once imagined. The body may be larger and capable of flying, but it comes with dangers he never understood before. At the same time, Evie suddenly experiences what it means to be small, vulnerable, and constantly surrounded by creatures that could easily overpower her. Every sound is louder, every threat feels closer, and even simple movement becomes difficult. The transformation begins teaching them something neither character expected. Survival looks completely different depending on which side of the food chain you are standing on. But the magical pots are not waiting for them forever. If Ollie and Ivy want to become themselves again, they must find a way to navigate the dangerous valley together and discover more of these mysterious objects. The problem is that neither of them knows where the pods came from or what rules control their power. Worse, the valley contains creatures and dangers that make their journey far more complicated than simply finding a magical shortcut. As the two former enemies begin moving together, their constant arguments slowly turn into reluctant cooperation. And somewhere along the way, both Ollie and Ivy begin to realize that the transformation may have happened for a reason. So, what happens when two sworn enemies are forced to live each other's lives? Can Ollie and Ivy survive long enough to find a way back to their original bodies? Or will the valley change them forever? And what is the real secret behind the mysterious pods that brought their impossible transformation to life? Their journey is only beginning, and the further they travel, the more dangerous and unexpectedly emotional their adventure becomes. If you enjoy animated adventure movies, fantasy stories, and unexpected friendship stories, make sure to follow the channel, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you think about Swapped. Now, let's continue the journey and find out what happens when Ollie and Ivy are forced to survive the valley in completely unfamiliar bodies. Ollie and Ivy quickly discover that becoming each other is much more complicated than simply looking different. Ollie is now trapped inside Ivy's bird body, but he has absolutely no idea how to control it. His first instinct is to run back toward the place where everything happened, hoping that another magical pod will immediately reverse the transformation. Instead, his unfamiliar body creates one problem after another. His wings move differently than his arms, his balance is completely wrong, and even the simplest jump becomes an uncontrolled flight. Ollie crashes through branches and lands awkwardly, leaving Ivy laughing despite the fact that she is facing the exact same problem in reverse. Ivy, now trapped inside Ollie's tiny puku body, cannot understand why everything around her suddenly feels enormous. A small patch of grass looks like a forest, while an ordinary hole in the ground looks like a dangerous cave. For the first time in her life, Ivy understands what it means to be physically weak in a world where she used to be one of the creatures at the top of the food chain. Their arguments continue as they try to decide what to do next. Ollie insists that they need to find another magical pot immediately, while Ivy believes they should return to their communities and seek help. But neither option is safe. If the Pukus discover that Ollie has somehow become a Javan, they may panic or attack him. The same is true for Ivy. If her fellow Javans discover that she has been transformed into a Puku, they may not even believe her. More importantly, the two communities have already developed deep mistrust because of the conflict surrounding the peoplets. Ollie knows that his people blame him for introducing the Javans to their food source, while Ivy knows that her own people are becoming increasingly dependent on something that does not belong to them. Their body swap has therefore placed them directly between two groups that are already moving toward confrontation. As they continue through the valley, Ollie starts discovering abilities he never knew he possessed. Only now they belong to Ivy's body. His new senses allow him to see movement from a distance, hear sounds he could never hear as a puku, and move through the air with incredible speed once he finally understands how to use his wings. At first, he thinks these abilities make him superior. He becomes excited by the freedom of flight and begins forgetting that Ivy is struggling with the opposite experience. Ivy, meanwhile, learns how difficult it is to survive as a puku. She has to hide from predators, squeeze through tiny spaces, and depend on instincts she never developed. Every time she complains, Ollie reminds her that this is what his life has always been like. That comment changes the tone of their argument because Ivy realizes that Ollie has been living with these dangers every single day without ever receiving the advantages she took for granted. Their journey becomes even more dangerous when they encounter creatures that recognize Ollie as a Javan. Because he is wearing Ivy's body, they assume he is simply another member of her species. Ollie suddenly realizes that he can move through places where he would normally never be accepted. At first, he considers using this opportunity to get closer to the Javans and convince them to stop taking the piplets. But the moment he approaches them, he realizes that the situation is more complicated than he expected. The Javans are not simply stealing because they want to hurt the Pukus. Their own survival depends on finding enough food, and the piplets have become an easy source of nourishment. From Ivy's perspective, taking them does not necessarily feel like an act of cruelty. It feels like survival. This forces Ollie to question everything he believed about his enemies. Ivy experiences a similar revelation from the opposite side. While traveling through the Puku territory, she meets some of Ollie's people and sees how seriously they are struggling. Their supplies are disappearing, and the community is becoming increasingly worried about the future. She notices that many Pukus are blaming Ollie for the entire situation because he was the one who first showed the Javans how to use the piplets. Ivy begins to understand that Ollie never intended to cause harm. He simply wanted to help someone who seemed different and lonely. For the first time, she starts feeling sympathy for him. She also realizes that her own actions have contributed to the problem. If she had not shared the information with the other Javans, the conflict might never have grown this large. They two finally stop arguing long enough to create an actual plan. Instead of immediately trying to return to their normal lives, they decide to search for the source of the magical pods. If they can understand why the pods exist and how they work, they may be able to reverse the transformation permanently. Their search takes them deeper into the valley, away from the familiar territories of both communities. The deeper they go, the stranger the environment becomes. They discover unusual plants, hidden pathways, and signs that other creatures may have encountered the same magic before them. What originally looked like a random accident begins to feel increasingly deliberate. Ollie starts wondering whether the pods were placed there by someone or something, and if so, why they appeared at exactly the moment he and Ivy were fighting. As night falls, the pair are forced to find shelter together. This becomes another challenge because their new bodies have completely different needs. Ollie is still learning how to survive as a bird, while Ivy is exhausted from dealing with the vulnerability of being a puku. They sit together in silence for a while, and the hostility between them finally begins to disappear. Ollie admits that he never wanted the pukus to suffer because of his mistake. Ivy admits that she never realized how much fear her species caused the smaller creatures of the valley. Neither one completely forgives the other, but they begin to understand that their real enemy may not be each other. Their circumstances are forcing them to see the valley from a perspective neither would have chosen voluntarily. The next morning, however, their fragile cooperation is tested again. A new danger appears, one powerful enough to threaten both of them regardless of which body they are using. They are forced to react quickly, and Ollie discovers that his new Javan abilities can protect Ivy in ways he never imagined. At the same time, Ivy uses her small size to reach a place Ollie cannot access. For the first time, their differences become an advantage rather than a problem. Instead of competing with each other, they combine their strengths. They manage to escape the immediate danger, but the experience leaves them with an important realization. If they want to survive and return to normal, they cannot keep thinking like enemies. They have to trust each other. But their biggest problem is still waiting ahead. The magical pods may hold the key to restoring their bodies, yet the deeper they travel into the valley, the more evidence they find that the transformation is connected to something much larger. And while Ollie and Ivy are learning to work together, their two communities are continuing to move toward conflict. If they cannot find a solution soon, their personal problem may become only a small part of a much bigger disaster. As Ollie and Ivy continue deeper into the valley, their journey becomes less about simply finding a magical pod and more about understanding the strange force that has changed their lives. They are still uncomfortable in each other's bodies, but the constant arguments have started to fade. Ollie is gradually learning how to control Ivy's wings, while Ivy is becoming surprisingly skilled at moving through the tiny spaces that once felt impossible to navigate. Every challenge teaches them something new about each other. Ollie begins to understand that Ivy was never simply a cruel predator, and Ivy begins to see that Ollie's kindness was never meant to cause the problems that followed. Their experiences are slowly breaking down the assumptions that kept their two species apart. Eventually, they discover a hidden area of the valley where the environment looks completely different from everything they have seen before. Strange plants surround an enormous underground passage, and scattered across the ground are signs that the magical pods have existed there for a very long time. Ollie becomes convinced that this must be the source of the transformation. As they investigate, they discover that the pods are connected to an ancient natural force capable of shifting creatures from one form to another. The discovery gives them hope, but it also creates a new problem. The pods do not simply change bodies whenever someone touches them. There appears to be a deeper connection between the creatures involved, almost as if the magic is forcing them to experience each other's lives for a reason. Ollie wants to find the fastest way back to his original body, but Ivy begins asking a more important question. What if they were never meant to reverse the transformation immediately? She points out that the magic appeared during the moment when they were fighting, at a time when neither of them understood the other. Maybe the strange force was responding to their conflict. Maybe the body swap was not random at all. Ollie initially rejects the idea because he only wants his old life back, but the evidence around them makes it difficult to ignore. The magical pods seem connected to balance, and the valley itself appears to be suffering because different species have stopped understanding their place within the ecosystem. Their investigation is interrupted when they hear movement nearby. Ollie quickly takes to the air while Ivy hides beneath a cluster of plants. What they see approaching is a group of Javans searching the area. Ivy recognizes some of them immediately and realizes that her people have followed their trail. She worries that if the Javans discover the magical pods, they could use their power for their own advantage. Ollie has the same concern. The transformation is already confusing enough, but if the pods can change the bodies of other creatures, they could become extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. The two decide to remain hidden until the Javans move away, but one of the creatures suddenly notices Ivy's movement and begins searching the area. Ollie reacts without thinking. He dives from above and creates a distraction, using Ivy's body to draw the Javans away from the hidden location. His flying is still imperfect, but he manages to lead them toward a different part of the valley. Ivy watches from below and realizes how much Ollie has changed since their first encounter. The same small creature who once accidentally caused trouble by trying to befriend her is now risking himself to protect both of them. She follows him, using her tiny puku body to move through a narrow passage and emerge behind the Javans. Together they create enough confusion to escape, but the encounter confirms something important. The Javans are not simply looking for Ivy, they are searching for the magical pods. Once they reach safety, Ivy admits that she is afraid of what her people might do if they discover the truth. Ollie asks why she did not tell them about the pods earlier. Ivy explains that she knows her community well enough to understand that they would see the magic as an opportunity. If they could change their bodies whenever they wanted, they could enter territories that normally belong to other species, steal food without being recognized, and gain advantages over creatures that could never defend themselves. Ollie realizes that the magic could destroy the balance of the valley if it became a weapon. They therefore agree that finding the pods is no longer enough. They must also make sure the magic does not fall into the wrong hands. Their conversation takes an emotional turn when Ollie finally admits something he has been hiding. He tells Ivy that he still feels responsible for the conflict between their species. He never expected that showing her how to eat the piplets would cause such a huge problem. Ivy responds by reminding him that he was trying to help. She also admits that she made her own mistakes by sharing what she learned with the rest of the Javans without thinking about the consequences. For the first time, neither of them tries to blame the other. Instead, they accept that both of them played a role in creating the situation. This honesty strengthens their partnership and gives them a new reason to keep going. Their search eventually leads them toward an enormous tree standing in the center of the valley. Unlike the other plants around it, this tree seems untouched by the changes happening in the ecosystem. Its roots stretch deep into the ground, and beneath those roots they find more evidence of the magical pods. Ollie realizes that the tree may be connected to the source of the transformation. But before they can investigate further, they hear a familiar sound coming from above. The Javans have found them again, and this time they are not alone. A confrontation begins around the ancient tree. Ollie tries to keep the magical pods hidden while Ivy attempts to distract her own people. But the situation quickly becomes chaotic. The Javans believe Ollie is simply another member of their species, while the Pukus have also begun searching the area after realizing that Ollie has disappeared. Suddenly, both communities are moving toward the same location without knowing the truth. If they meet here, the confrontation could become disastrous. Ollie and Ivy realize they have only one chance to prevent the two sides from fighting. They rush toward the center of the tree, where they discover a strange opening beneath the roots. Inside is a chamber filled with glowing pods, far more powerful than the ones that transformed them. The sight leaves them speechless. They finally understand that what happened to them was only a small example of what this magic can do. But before they can figure out how to use it, someone else enters the chamber. The identity of this newcomer changes everything, because it becomes clear that the secret of the pods may have been known by another creature all along. Ollie and Ivy freeze as the stranger approaches the magical chamber. They realize that their search has led them directly to the heart of the mystery. But they have also walked into a situation they may no longer be able to control. If the stranger wants the power of the pods, their entire plan could collapse. And with both communities closing in, Ollie and Ivy must decide whether to protect the secret, reveal the truth, or risk using the magic themselves before it is too late. The mysterious creature standing inside the chamber immediately makes Ollie and Ivy realize that they are not the first ones to discover the power of the magical pods. The stranger does not attack them, but the way he watches them makes it clear that he knows exactly what has happened. Ollie cautiously asks how he knows about the pods, but instead of giving a direct answer, the stranger explains that the magic has existed in the valley for generations. The pods are part of an ancient natural system designed to restore balance whenever the creatures of the valley become too divided. According to him, the transformation of Ollie and Ivy was not an accident. Their bodies were changed because they had become trapped in a conflict where neither side could understand the other. The magic forced them to experience life from the opposite perspective. Ollie is shocked by this explanation because he had spent so much time believing that the transformation was simply a terrible mistake. Ivy is equally unsettled because she realizes that the magic may not return them to normal just because they find the right pod. The stranger tells them that the pods respond to intention. A creature who touches one while thinking only about personal gain may receive an entirely different result from someone who uses the magic to restore balance. This makes Ollie nervous. He wants his own body back more than anything, but he also understands that using the magic selfishly could make the situation worse. Ivy asks whether there is a way to reverse their transformation without damaging the valley, and the stranger tells them that there is, but they must first prove that they have truly understood each other. Before they can ask what that means, the sound of wings and movement echoes through the chamber. The Javans have finally reached the entrance. At the same time, the Pukus are approaching from another direction. The stranger immediately warns Ollie and Ivy that if both groups enter the chamber at once, they will fight over the magical pods. Ollie looks at Ivy and realizes that they have very little time. Their biggest challenge is no longer finding a way home. They must stop their communities from destroying each other. Ollie quickly decides to use the advantage of his current body. As a Jawan, he can fly toward the upper tunnels and draw his former enemies away from the chamber. Ivy meanwhile uses her tiny Puku body to move through a narrow passage and reach the other side of the roots. Their plan is risky, but it works for a moment. Ollie flies through the main entrance, making the Javans believe that he is simply another bird protecting the chamber. He leads them toward a different section of the valley, while Ivy moves toward the Puku group. She tries to convince them to stop, but they do not recognize her. To them, she is just another small creature behaving strangely. Ivy becomes desperate and begins using details that only Ollie would know. She describes childhood memories, private conversations, and mistakes that Ollie had never told anyone else. Some of the Pukus begin to listen, but others refuse to believe her. Kalu, Ollie's father, becomes especially suspicious. He has been worried about Ollie ever since the conflict began, and now he is hearing a strange Puku claim to be his son. Ivy finally tells him about the magical pods. She explains that Ollie is alive, but he is trapped in Ivy's body. Kalu does not immediately believe her, but the possibility is enough to stop the group from attacking. Meanwhile, Ollie is struggling to keep the Javans away from the chamber. His flying has improved, but he still cannot control the bird body perfectly. The Javans begin chasing him, and he realizes that he cannot keep running forever. Instead of escaping, he turns around and flies directly toward them. He lands in front of Ivy's former community and tries to communicate. His voice and appearance make it impossible for them to understand who he really is, but his actions begin to confuse them. He refuses to attack even when they surround him. He simply points toward the chamber and tries to warn them about the danger of the pods. One Javan finally realizes that something is wrong. He notices that Ollie is behaving unlike any other Javan and remembers seeing Ivy disappear near the same location. The group becomes divided. Some believe the strange bird is hiding something, while others think the magical chamber may contain something valuable. Their disagreement gives Ollie the opportunity to escape. He flies back toward the chamber, but by now the situation has become even more dangerous. A few Javans have ignored the warning and entered the roots anyway. Inside the chamber, Ivy is reunited with Ollie, but neither has time to celebrate. They see several Javans standing around the magical pods, fascinated by their power. One of them reaches toward a glowing pod, believing it can give him an advantage over every other creature in the valley. The stranger immediately warns him not to touch it, but the warning comes too late. The Javan grabs the pod and the chamber suddenly fills with blinding light. The magical energy spreads through the roots of the ancient tree. The ground begins shaking, the glowing pods activate one after another, and strange waves of energy move through the valley. Outside, both the Pukus and the Javans feel the disturbance. Animals begin fleeing from their territories as the balance of the environment starts breaking apart. Ollie realizes that the pods are not simply objects that change bodies. They are connected to the entire valley, and disturbing them could affect every creature living there. The stranger tells Ollie and Ivy that they must stop the chain reaction before the magic spreads beyond the chamber. There is only one way to do it. The creatures who caused the imbalance must willingly cooperate. Ollie looks at Ivy and they both understand what that means. Their journey began because they could not understand each other, but now the fate of the entire valley depends on them working together. They rush toward the center of the chamber and try to contain the magical energy. Ollie uses the strength and mobility of Ivy's body to reach the upper roots, while Ivy moves through the lower tunnels to redirect the energy. Their teamwork begins stabilizing the chamber, but the process is not enough. The magic continues spreading and the ancient tree starts cracking beneath the pressure. Outside, Kalu finally realizes that the strange Puku beside him may actually be Ivy. He begins telling the other Pukus that they need to stop fighting and help the Javans. At the same time, some of the Javans begin understanding that their search for the pods has placed everyone in danger. For the first time, both groups are forced to choose between protecting themselves and protecting the valley. Inside the chamber, Ollie and Ivy discover that the final glowing pod is different from all the others. It is surrounded by a powerful light, and the stranger tells them that this is the pod that can restore their original forms. But there is a condition. They must activate it together and they must do so without wishing for revenge, power, or personal advantage. Ollie reaches toward the pod but he hesitates. He has spent the entire journey wanting to become himself again. Now he realizes that returning to normal may not be enough. If he and Ivy go back to their old bodies while their communities remain enemies, nothing will truly change. Ivy feels the same. They look at each other, and for the first time, neither is afraid of what the other might do. Together, they place their hands on the glowing pod. The chamber suddenly becomes silent. The magical energy begins pulling toward them, and the entire valley seems to hold its breath. Ollie and Ivy close their eyes, knowing that whatever happens next will determine not only whether they get their bodies back, but whether the creatures of the valley can finally learn to live together. The moment Ollie and Ivy touch the final glowing pod together, the entire chamber falls completely silent. The violent energy that had been shaking the ancient tree suddenly begins moving toward them instead of spreading outward. Ollie feels a strange pressure running through Ivy's body, while Ivy experiences the same sensation from inside Ollie's small puku form. For a few seconds neither of them can move. Then the pod releases a powerful wave of light that fills the chamber and travels through the roots of the tree. Outside, every creature in the valley sees the strange glow rising into the sky. The magical disturbance begins to weaken, but the transformation does not immediately disappear. Ollie and Ivy realize that the magic is testing them one final time. They must truly accept the experience they have shared, instead of simply wishing to escape it. Inside their minds, both of them begin remembering everything that happened since the body swap. Ollie remembers how terrified he was when he first realized he had become a Javan. He remembers believing that Ivy's life was easy because she could fly, hunt, and move through the valley without fear. but now he understands that her world had dangers of its own. He remembers the pressure she faced from her community and the expectations placed on her because of her species. At the same time, Ivy remembers her first moments inside Ollie's tiny body. She remembers feeling helpless, surrounded by creatures much larger than herself, and finally understanding why Ollie had always been so careful around predators. The memories force both of them to confront something they had avoided for a long time. They had judged each other without ever understanding what life was like on the other side. The magical vision then shows them something even more disturbing. They see what could happen if the valley continues along its current path. The Pukus and Javans become increasingly hostile, fighting over food and territory until the entire ecosystem begins to collapse. The piplets disappear, the plants begin dying, and creatures that depend on both species lose their homes. Ollie sees his community suffering because of the mistake he made. Ivy sees her own people becoming more aggressive because they refuse to change. The vision makes it clear that the body swap was never simply about two individuals. It was a warning about what happens when different groups stop seeing each other as living beings and begin seeing each other only as enemies. Ollie finally understands what the magic has been trying to teach him. He cannot undo the consequences of his actions by pretending they never happened. He must accept responsibility and help repair the damage. Ivy reaches the same conclusion. She admits that she cannot blame Ollie for everything, because she also helped spread the knowledge about the piplets among the Javans. They both realize that restoring their bodies is only one part of the solution. They must also restore trust between their communities. As soon as they accept this, the magical energy surrounding them becomes calmer. The final pod begins glowing brighter. Back in the physical world, the creatures gathered around the ancient tree witness something extraordinary. The roots that had been cracking began healing, the strange lights disappear from the sky, and the dangerous energy flowing through the valley slowly returns to the center of the chamber. The Javans who had entered the roots finally understand that their actions nearly destroyed the balance of the valley. Some lower their heads in shame, while others begin helping the Pukus move away from the unstable area. Kalu watches the chamber carefully, still unsure whether his son is truly alive. Then a familiar voice calls his name from inside. The voice belongs to Ollie, but it is coming from Ivy's body. Kalu immediately realizes the truth. He rushes forward, but before he can reach them, another wave of magic passes through the chamber. Ollie and Ivy are lifted slightly from the ground as the final transformation begins. Their bodies start glowing, and the shapes of their original forms slowly return. Ollie's wings disappear as his small Puku body reforms. At the same time, Ivy grows back into her Javan body. The transformation is not painful, but it is overwhelming. After everything they have experienced, becoming themselves again feels almost strange. When the magic finally ends, Ollie opens his eyes and sees his own small hands. For a moment, he simply stares at them. He moves his arms, touches his face, and realizes that he is finally himself again. Across from him, Ivy stretches her wings and checks that she has returned to her normal form. The two look at each other, and instead of arguing, they smile. Their bodies are back, but they are not the same creatures they were before. The experience has changed how they see the world. However, the story is far from over. The Pukus and Javans are still standing on opposite sides of the chamber, and neither group knows what will happen next. Ollie steps forward and admits to everyone that he was the one who first showed Ivy how to use the piplets. He does not try to hide his mistake or blame anyone else. He explains that he wanted to help her, but he never considered what might happen if the knowledge spread. Ivy then steps forward and admits her own responsibility. She tells her people that she shared the information without thinking about the consequences. Their honesty surprises everyone because neither of them is trying to protect their reputation. At first, some members of both communities remain angry. The Pukus believe the Javans took something that did not belong to them, while the Javans argue that they were simply trying to survive. But Ollie and Ivy explain what they learned during their journey. The problem was never solved by one side defeating the other. Every time one group tried to take more, the entire valley suffered. They proposed that the communities work together to create a new system for sharing resources and protecting the piplets. It is not an easy solution, but it is the first time anyone has suggested cooperation instead of conflict. The stranger who guided them through the chamber watches quietly as the two groups begin discussing the future. He reminds Ollie and Ivy that balance is not something that can be created once and then forgotten. It must be protected through every decision the creatures make. The magical pods have served their purpose, but their lesson will remain. The stranger then disappears into the deeper part of the valley, leaving Ollie and Ivy wondering whether they will ever see him again. As everyone leaves the ancient tree, Ollie notices something unusual. One tiny magical pod remains hidden among the roots. He reaches toward it, but Ivy stops him. They both laugh because they have learned exactly why they should not casually touch mysterious magical objects anymore. Ollie steps away, and together they walk back toward their communities. For the first time, the valley feels different. The creatures are still cautious, and the old disagreements have not magically disappeared. But there is a sense that something has changed. Ollie no longer sees the Javans as monsters, and Ivy no longer sees the Pukus as insignificant prey. They have experienced each other's lives, and that experience has created a connection stronger than their old differences. But just as they begin believing the danger is over, a distant rumble echoes through the valley. Ollie and Ivy look toward the mountains and notice another strange glow appearing far beyond the ancient tree. They realize that the magical force may not be limited to their own region. Whatever created the pods could still be active somewhere deeper in the valley. And if another transformation is about to happen, Ollie and Ivy may soon discover that their adventure was only the beginning. The strange glow beyond the mountains immediately changes the mood in the valley. Ollie and Ivy had believed that the magical crisis was finally over, but the light suggests that the ancient force behind the pods is still active. The two of them quietly watch the distant mountains as another pulse of energy spreads across the sky. The other creatures notice it as well, and the conversation among the Pukus and Javans suddenly stops. Everyone remembers what happened inside the ancient tree, and nobody wants to experience another transformation or another collapse of the valley. Ollie realizes that if they ignore the new warning, the same disaster could happen again, only this time on a much larger scale. Ollie and Ivy decide to investigate before fear spreads through the communities. They follow a narrow trail leading toward the mountains, passing through areas they had never explored before. As they travel, they notice that the environment is changing. Plants that were once green have begun glowing faintly. Small streams are flowing in strange directions, and some animals are behaving as though they can sense something coming. Ivy becomes increasingly worried because the signs remind her of what happened around the magical chamber. Ollie tries to remain optimistic, but even he knows that the valley is responding to something powerful beneath the ground. Their journey leads them to a huge rocky area where they discover a series of markings carved into the stone. The symbols resemble the patterns surrounding the magical pods, but these markings are much older and more complex. Ollie realizes that the pods may not have been created by the valley itself. Instead, they could be connected to an ancient network extending throughout the entire region. Ivy notices that some of the symbols represent different species standing together, while others show creatures fighting and destroying their surroundings. The images appear to tell a story about previous generations that faced the same problem. The body-swapping magic may have existed for thousands of years as a way to force creatures to understand one another before conflict destroyed the ecosystem. Suddenly, they hear a loud crack from inside the mountain. A section of rock collapses, revealing a hidden passage. Ollie and Ivy exchange a nervous look before entering. The tunnel leads deep underground, and the further they go, the warmer the air becomes. Eventually they reach a massive underground chamber filled with glowing roots. Unlike the chamber beneath the ancient tree, these roots are not connected to a single plant. They stretch across the ceiling, walls, and floor, forming what looks like an enormous living network. At the center is a large, crystal-like structure surrounded by dozens of dormant pods. Ollie realizes that this must be another source of the magic. Before they can investigate, they hear footsteps behind them. The stranger from the previous chamber appears again. This time he seems more concerned than before. He explains that the energy they saw in the mountains is coming from a place known as the heart of the valley. For generations the magical system has remained stable because the creatures living above have maintained a balance with their environment. But the recent conflict between the Pacus and Javans disturbed that balance. When the pods were activated, the energy was redirected through the network, awakening parts of the system that had been dormant for centuries. Ollie asks what will happen if the heart continues awakening. The stranger explains that the valley could experience uncontrolled transformations. Creatures could suddenly exchange bodies without warning, causing confusion throughout every territory. Worse, the boundaries between different ecosystems could collapse. Predators could lose their natural abilities, prey animals could become exposed to unfamiliar dangers, and entire communities could be forced to abandon their homes. The magic was designed to correct imbalance, but if the imbalance becomes too severe, the correction itself could become destructive. Ivy asks whether there is another way to stop it. The stranger points toward the enormous crystal at the center of the chamber. According to him, the crystal is connected to every magical pod in the valley. If it can be stabilized, the remaining energy will gradually return to its natural state. But there is a problem. The crystal responds only to cooperation between creatures that naturally distrust one another. It needs two different species to work together willingly. Ollie and Ivy immediately understand why they were brought here. Their first body swap may have been the beginning of a much larger test. They approach the crystal together, but nothing happens. Ollie places his hand against its surface, while Ivy touches the opposite side. The crystal glows for a moment and then becomes dark again. The stranger explains that simply standing together is not enough. The magic can sense whether they genuinely trust each other. Ollie and Ivy realize that despite everything they have experienced, some of their old fears still remain. Ollie still worries that Ivy could turn against him if her community becomes threatened. Ivy still wonders whether Ollie would choose his own people over her if the situation became dangerous. The crystal is forcing them to confront those doubts. They decide to continue deeper into the chamber instead of trying to activate the crystal immediately. Along the walls, they find more images showing creatures from different species working together. One image catches Ivy's attention because it shows a tiny puku standing beside a Javan, exactly like the two of them. Beneath the image is a symbol that appears to represent balance. Ollie realizes that creatures like them may have existed before, and perhaps their relationship is part of a repeating cycle. Whenever two groups become too divided, the magic creates a situation that forces individuals from opposite sides to understand each other. But then they discover something that makes the situation even more frightening. One of the walls shows a massive creature surrounded by magical energy, apparently trying to control the entire network of pods. The creature is eventually consumed by the energy it attempted to control. Ivy realizes that the ancient magic has been dangerous before, and whoever tries to dominate it could destroy themselves and everyone around them. Before Ollie and Ivy can examine the image further, a violent tremor shakes the chamber. Several dormant pods suddenly begin glowing. One of them rises from the ground and floats toward the crystal. The stranger immediately tells them to move away, but the pod releases a wave of energy before they can escape. The light spreads through the chamber and shoots upward through the mountain. Outside, the valley begins changing again. Animals start reacting to the energy, and distant flashes appear across the landscape. The Pacus and Javans realize that Ollie and Ivy have not returned, and Kalu fears that something has gone wrong. Meanwhile, deep beneath the mountain, Ollie and Ivy are separated by the magical surge. Ollie is pushed toward one side of the chamber, while Ivy is thrown toward another. They call out to each other, but the crystal begins creating strange visions around them. Ollie suddenly finds himself surrounded by images of the Puku community in danger. Ivy sees visions of the Javans struggling to survive. Each is given a choice: save their own people or continue searching for the other. The magic is testing the trust they have built. Ollie sees his father trapped beneath falling rocks, and immediately wants to run toward him. At the same time, Ivy sees her own community being surrounded by danger. For a moment, both believe they have to choose their own species. But then Ollie remembers what happened when they first touched the final pod. He realizes that the entire lesson has always been about refusing to choose one side at the expense of the other. Instead of following the visions, Ollie turns away from the image of his father and searches for Ivy. Across the chamber, Ivy makes the same decision. She stops chasing the vision of her community and begins searching for Ollie. The moment they find each other, the visions disappear. The crystal suddenly lights up with incredible force. For the first time, the heart of the valley recognizes that their trust is genuine. The magical network begins stabilizing, but the process also reveals something hidden beneath the crystal. A sealed doorway slowly opens, exposing a passage leading even deeper underground. The stranger looks at Ollie and Ivy with a serious expression and tells them that the true source of the magic lies beyond that door, and whatever is waiting there may finally reveal why the body-swapping pods exist, and why Ollie and Ivy were chosen to awaken them. The sealed doorway slowly opens, revealing a passage that seems to disappear into complete darkness. Ollie and Ivy stand at the entrance, unsure whether they should continue. The stranger warns them that whatever lies beyond the doorway is older and more powerful than anything they've encountered so far. The magical network has been responding to their choices, and now the final chamber may reveal why the pods chose them in the first place. Ollie knows they cannot turn back. If the source of the magic remains unstable, the valley could still be destroyed. Ivy agrees, and together they enter the passage while the stranger remains behind to protect the crystal. The tunnel is unlike anything they have seen before. Instead of ordinary stone, the walls appear to be made from a mixture of roots and crystal. Faint images move across the surface, as though the walls themselves are remembering events from the past. Ollie notices scenes of different animals fighting over food, territory, and power. Then the images change. He sees those same creatures learning to cooperate after experiencing life from each other's perspective. The body-swapping magic was never designed as a punishment. It was created as a last resort, a way to break down hatred before conflict became impossible to stop. Every transformation represented a chance for two opposing creatures to understand one another. As Ollie and Ivy move deeper, they discover that the system has been weakened over time. The magic once depended on cooperation between many different species, but as generations passed, the creatures forgot the original purpose of the pods. They began seeing the transformations as strange accidents rather than warnings. Eventually, some creatures even tried to control the magic for personal gain. The result was a growing imbalance that the system could no longer completely correct. Ollie realizes that the recent conflict between the Pukus and Javans may have simply been the event that pushed the ancient system beyond its limit. At the end of the passage, they find a huge circular chamber. In the center is a floating sphere of light surrounded by dozens of smaller crystals. Unlike the pods they have already seen, this object does not look like something that belongs to the natural world. It appears to be the heart of the entire magical system. As Ollie approaches, the sphere reacts immediately. Images begin forming around them, and they see the beginning of the valley itself. The creatures are shown living together before the different territories and rivalries developed. There was no division between predator and prey in the way they understand it today. Every species depended on the others. Ivy suddenly notices something hidden within the images. The first creatures who created the system were not powerful predators or rulers. They were small creatures who realized that survival depended on cooperation. They created the pods as a way to prevent future generations from repeating the same mistakes. The magic would only activate when conflict reached a dangerous level, and it would choose individuals from opposing sides. Those individuals would then experience each other's lives until they could understand the consequences of their actions. Ollie begins to understand why he and Ivy were chosen. Their conflict represented a larger problem in the valley. Ollie had acted out of kindness without considering the consequences, while Ivy had acted out of survival without considering the damage her actions could cause. Neither was completely wrong, and neither was completely innocent. They were simply trapped inside a system where every creature believed its own needs were more important than everyone else's. The magic had chosen them because they were capable of changing that pattern. But before they can fully understand the revelation, a dark energy begins spreading across the chamber. The stranger's warning becomes clear. The system is unstable because the magical network has awakened too quickly. If the energy reaches the central sphere, the entire valley could experience uncontrolled transformations. Ollie and Ivy attempt to approach the sphere, but the force pushes them backward. They realize that they cannot simply shut the system down. They have to restore the balance that has been missing for generations. Suddenly, voices echo through the chamber. The Pukus and Javans have followed them into the mountain. Kalu leads the Puku group, while several Javans follow behind. They have finally realized that Ollie and Ivy are not the only ones who can solve the problem. The stranger explains that the ancient system requires more than two individuals. Ollie and Ivy were the ones who awakened it, but restoring it requires the cooperation of the communities they represent. At first, the Pukus and Javans hesitate. Their old rivalry is still strong, and neither group fully trusts the other. Then the mountain shakes violently. A large section of the ceiling collapses, trapping several creatures beneath the rocks. Without thinking, members of both groups begin helping each other. Pukus crawl into narrow spaces to reach trapped Javans, while the larger birds use their strength to move heavy stones away from the smaller creatures. For the first time, their cooperation happens naturally rather than because someone orders them to do it. The central sphere reacts to this change. Its dark energy begins shrinking, replaced by a softer glow. Ollie realizes that the magic was never asking them to become the same. It was asking them to understand that different creatures can still depend on each other. The valley does not need every species to live the same way. It needs them to recognize the consequences of their choices. Ivy steps forward and speaks to her people. She tells them that the piplets cannot continue being taken without limits. If the Javans consume everything, they will eventually destroy the source they depend on. She proposes that the communities establish shared territories and control harvesting. The Javans will receive enough food to survive, while the Pukus will be able to protect the resources and continue growing them. It is not a perfect solution, but it gives both groups a reason to cooperate. Kalu supports the idea, surprising Oli. He admits that protecting the Pukus does not mean destroying the Javans. If the valley collapses, everyone loses. Several Javans agree with him, and slowly the tension begins to disappear. The central sphere grows brighter as more creatures choose cooperation over fear. Then the stranger reveals the final truth. The magical system does not need to remain active forever. Once the creatures of the valley learn to maintain balance themselves, the pods will return to their dormant state. The body swapping magic was never meant to control the creatures. It was meant to give them a chance to learn before the consequences became irreversible. Ollie and Ivy look at each other and realize that their journey has finally reached its true purpose. They were never simply trying to get their bodies back. They were learning how to see the world through someone else's eyes. Now they have to make sure that lesson reaches everyone else. The centrosphere suddenly releases one final wave of energy. This time, instead of causing chaos, the energy travels peacefully through the underground roots and spreads across the valley. The strange glowing plants return to normal, the unstable ground becomes still, and the magical pods begin disappearing one by one. The ancient system is finally stabilizing. But as the last wave of energy fades, one small pod remains glowing in the darkness. Ollie notices it immediately. Unlike the other pods, this one is not connected to the network. It appears to have been activated by something outside the valley. Ollie and Ivy exchange worried looks. Their original problem may be solved, but a new mystery has just appeared. And whatever activated that final pod may be coming from somewhere far beyond their world. The final glowing pod remains suspended in the darkness, completely different from everything Ollie and Ivy have seen before. While the other pods are connected to the magical network beneath the valley, this one seems to exist outside of it. Its light pulses slowly, almost like a heartbeat, and every time it flashes, the underground chamber becomes colder. Ollie steps closer, but Ivy immediately stops him. After everything they have experienced, they know better than to touch a mysterious magical object without understanding what it can do. The stranger approaches the pot and studies it carefully. For the first time, he looks genuinely frightened. He explains that this pot does not belong to the valley. It is an outsider, carrying a completely different kind of energy. The stranger reveals that long ago the magical network was created to protect the valley from internal conflict. But the world beyond the valley has its own dangers. There are places where the balance between species has already collapsed, and some creatures have searched for the ancient magic because they believe it can give them control over nature itself. The pot in front of them may have entered the valley through one of those forgotten pathways. Ollie immediately asks whether someone could have deliberately sent it there. The stranger does not answer directly, but his silence tells Ollie everything he needs to know. The magical system may have been awakened by the conflict between the Pukus and Javans, but something else may have been waiting for that opportunity. Before anyone can investigate further, the pod suddenly releases a wave of energy. The chamber fills with images of distant landscapes. Ollie sees enormous mountains, endless forests, and creatures he has never encountered before. Ivy sees strange skies and unfamiliar territories beyond the valley. The images disappear almost as quickly as they appear, but one detail remains clear. Somewhere, far away, another group of creatures is standing around a similar magical object. They seem to be searching for something, and the final image shows them looking directly toward the valley. The revelation frightens everyone. The Pukus and Javans had spent so long believing their own conflict was the biggest problem in their world that they never considered the possibility of an outside threat. Ollie realizes that the valley may have been protected by its isolation for generations. If someone outside discovers the magical network, they could attempt to control it. Ivy argues that they should destroy the remaining pod before anyone can use it. The stranger warns that destroying it may be impossible. The pod is connected to something beyond their understanding, and damaging it could create an even larger rupture between the valley and the outside world. Instead of panicking, Ollie suggests they protect it. He points out that the valley has just learned an important lesson. Different species do not need to fight simply because they are different. If the outsiders are searching for the magic, the Pukus and Javans will have to work together to keep it safe. Kalu agrees, although some of the older Pukus remain suspicious. The Javans also understand that they cannot protect their own territory alone. For the first time, both communities begin discussing how they could build a shared defense around the valley. Meanwhile, the stranger takes Ollie and Ivy aside and explains that there is another reason they were chosen by the magic. Their transformation created a bond that allows them to sense changes in the magical network before anyone else can. Ollie is surprised because he thought their connection would disappear after they returned to their normal bodies. Instead, he can still feel a faint vibration whenever the magical energy changes. Ivy can feel it too. This means that if the outsider threat approaches, they may be able to detect it before anyone else. The two agree to remain together while the communities prepare, but their new responsibility immediately creates tension. Ollie wants to protect everyone, while Ivy believes they should move the pot somewhere hidden. Neither approach is obviously correct. If they hide it, the outsider may still find it and catch them unprepared. If they leave it where it is, the entire valley could become a target. Their argument reminds them of how they used to think before the body swap. Ollie wants to act quickly, while Ivy wants to. The mysterious object finally reaches the edge of the valley, and its enormous shadow passes over the mountains. Every creature becomes silent as they watch it descend. The object is unlike anything they have ever seen. It is surrounded by a strange energy that makes the air vibrate, and its surface appears to be made from a combination of crystal and living material. The pukus hide among the rocks, while the javans circle overhead, waiting for Ollie and Ivy to give them a signal. But Ollie knows that attacking immediately would be a mistake. They still do not understand what has arrived, and after everything they have learned about the magical system, they know that fear can make a dangerous situation even worse. The object lands near the outer mountains, sending a powerful shock wave through the valley. Trees bend, rocks fall, and several creatures are knocked off their feet. When the dust finally clears, a large opening appears on its surface. From inside, several unfamiliar creatures emerge. They are not immediately aggressive, but their appearance makes everyone nervous. They wear strange protective coverings and carry devices that glow with the same energy as the magical pods. One of them steps forward and looks directly toward the mountains. The stranger immediately realizes what they are searching for. They have come for the ancient magic. Ollie and Ivy decide to approach them before the situation becomes violent. They move forward together while the Pukus and Javans remain behind them. The leader of the newcomers introduces himself and explains that his people have traveled a great distance because their own world is dying. Their environment has been damaged by generations of conflict and uncontrolled use of natural resources. They discovered records describing the valley and its magical system and came looking for a way to restore their world. From their perspective, taking the magic is not about power, it is about survival. Ollie understands their desperation immediately, but he also realizes that giving them access to the pods could destroy the valley. The leader argues that the valley has enough magical energy to save millions of creatures. He asks why the Pukus and Javans should keep such a powerful resource for themselves when another world is suffering. This question creates a difficult dilemma. Some Pukus believe the outsiders should leave, while others feel sympathy for them. The Javans are divided as well. Ollie knows that the newcomers are not simply villains. They are creatures facing the same problem the valley once faced: survival versus balance. But he also remembers what happened when the Javans took too many piplets. A resource that seems unlimited can disappear quickly when everyone takes more than they need. Ivy steps forward and explains that the magical system cannot simply be removed from the valley. It is connected to the ecosystem itself. If the outsiders take it, their world may not be saved at all. Instead, the damage could spread to both worlds. The leader refuses to accept this explanation. He believes that his people have no choice. His world is already collapsing and they cannot return empty handed. He orders his companions to activate their devices. The moment the devices turn on, the ancient pod deep beneath the mountain responds. A huge wave of energy shoots through the valley. The ground begins shaking again and the magical network becomes unstable. Ollie immediately realizes that the outsiders are trying to connect their technology to the valley's magic. If the connection succeeds, they could drain the entire system. Ivy tells the Javans to protect the mountains while the Pukus secure the underground passages. For the first time, the two communities move as a single force. The outsiders begin advancing toward the mountain. Their technology gives them an advantage, but they are unfamiliar with the valley's environment. The Pukus use their knowledge of underground tunnels to redirect them, while the Javans attack from above without causing unnecessary damage. Ollie and Ivy move between both groups, coordinating their actions. Instead of fighting with anger, they fight with a clear goal: protect the valley without destroying the outsiders. The battle becomes increasingly intense. One of the outsider devices reaches the magical chamber and connects to the central network. The crystal begins losing its light. If the connection continues, the entire system could collapse. Ollie rushes toward the chamber while Ivy stays outside to slow the remaining attackers. Ollie reaches the crystal and sees that the magical energy is being pulled away. He tries to disconnect the device, but it is too powerful. Then Ollie remembers the lesson of the body swap. The magic does not respond to strength, it responds to understanding. Instead of trying to destroy the device, Ollie reaches out to the creature controlling it. He explains that he understands why they came. He tells them about his own mistake with the piplets and how easily good intentions can create destruction. He tells them that the valley once faced the same problem their world is facing now. The solution was not taking more, it was learning how to survive without destroying the source of survival. For a moment, the outsider hesitates. The leader arrives and sees the weakening crystal. He finally understands that the technology is not saving his people, it is making the problem worse. If they drain the magical network, they may receive a temporary supply of energy, but both worlds could collapse afterward. He orders his people to shut down their devices, but it is already too late. The central crystal has absorbed too much energy and cracks begin spreading across its surface. The magical network starts collapsing. The stranger warns everyone that if the crystal breaks, every remaining pod in the valley will activate simultaneously. Thousands of creatures could be transformed without warning, and the ecosystem could become completely unstable. Ollie and Ivy realize they have only one option. They must enter the center of the magical network and stabilize the crystal from within. The two move toward the glowing chamber while the Pukus, Javans, and outsiders work together to hold the collapsing structure in place. Ollie reaches the center first, but the energy immediately throws him backward. Ivy catches him and refuses to let him continue alone. Together they approach the crystal. The same magical light that once changed their body surrounds them again. Ollie remembers being trapped inside Ivy's body. Ivy remembers living as Ollie. They remember every argument, every mistake, every moment when they almost gave up on each other. Then they understand the final lesson. They were never supposed to become identical. They were supposed to become different creatures who could still understand one another. Ollie and Ivy placed their hands against the cracked crystal at the same time. The magical energy stops spreading. The cracks begin closing. Across the valley, the glowing pods slowly shut down. The outsider devices lose power. The ancient network becomes silent. For a moment, everyone believes the crisis is finally over. Then one final pulse travels through the mountain. The crystal opens instead of closing, and from inside it, a powerful light emerges, revealing something hidden deep beneath the valley that no one has ever seen before. Ollie and Ivy stare at the light in disbelief. The stranger whispers that the valley has just awakened its oldest secret, and whatever comes next may determine the future of every world connected to the magical network. The powerful light rising from the center of the crystal spreads through the entire underground chamber. But this time there is no chaos. Instead, the energy becomes calm and almost peaceful. Ollie and Ivy remain beside the crystal as images begin forming inside the light. They see the history of the valley, but they also see places far beyond it. Different worlds appear one after another, each connected by the same ancient magical network. The truth finally becomes clear. The valley was never the only place protected by this system. It was one small part of a much larger balance that connected countless living environments. The magical pods were created to help different species understand one another before fear and conflict could destroy their homes. The outsider leader watches the visions with disbelief. He realizes that the magic they came searching for was never meant to be taken from one world and given to another. It was designed to maintain balance across many worlds. If one civilization tried to control it for itself, the entire network could become unstable. His desperation had almost caused the exact disaster he wanted to prevent. Instead of becoming angry, he finally accepts responsibility. He tells Ollie and Ivy that his people were so focused on saving their own world that they had forgotten to consider the consequences for everyone else. Ollie understands because he made the same mistake when he first showed Ivy the piplets. Sometimes the desire to help can become dangerous when you only think about the immediate problem. The ancient system then presents one final choice. The magical network can remain active, allowing the pods to continue guiding creatures whenever conflict becomes dangerous, or it can be placed into a dormant state and allow the creatures themselves to take responsibility for maintaining balance. Ollie believes the second option is better. The valley has already learned that understanding cannot be forced forever. If every disagreement automatically resulted in a magical body swap, the creatures would never truly learn how to solve their problems themselves. Ivy agrees and tells the others that the magic should be a teacher, not a ruler. The stranger explains that activating the dormant state will require cooperation from every species currently connected to the valley. The Pukus must agree to protect their resources without treating the Javans as enemies. The Javans must agree to take only what they need and help protect the environment that provides their food. The outsiders must agree not to remove the magical energy for themselves. It is a simple promise, but making everyone accept it is not easy. Some creatures remain suspicious, and others fear that cooperation will leave them vulnerable. Ollie steps forward and reminds them that the valley has already shown what happens when everyone chooses only their own interests. Kalu is the first to support Ollie. He tells the Pukus that protecting their community does not mean refusing to help anyone else. If they want the valley to survive, they have to think beyond their own territory. The Javan leader then steps forward and accepts the same responsibility for his people. Finally, the outsider leader promises that his people will return home without taking the magical system. Instead, they will use what they have learned to rebuild their world through sustainable methods. They will also share their knowledge with the valley rather than keeping it secret. Slowly, the different groups begin agreeing to the new arrangement. As each species accepts the agreement, the central crystal becomes brighter. The energy begins flowing through the network one final time. But instead of activating the pods, it slowly shuts them down. Across the valley, the magical objects disappeared beneath the roots and rocks. Their power is not destroyed, it simply returns to a dormant state. The ancient system will remain underground, waiting in case the creatures ever forget the lesson again. But this time, the valley's future will depend on the choices of the creatures themselves. Ollie and Ivy watch the final pod disappear, and for a moment they both feel strangely emotional. The magical journey that forced them to live inside each other's bodies is finally over. Ollie jokes that he never wants to see another blowing pod for the rest of his life. Ivy laughs and tells him that if he ever touches one again, she is leaving him behind. Their friendship has become stronger than either of them expected. They began as creatures from opposite sides of a conflict, but now they have become symbols of cooperation for both communities. When they return to the surface, the valley looks completely different. The plants have returned to normal, the strange lights have disappeared from the sky, and the animals have begun rebuilding their territories. The Pukus and Javans start working together to manage the piplets. Instead of one group taking everything, they create a system where the resource can grow and be shared. The Javans help protect the larger areas, while the Pukus care for the smaller growing regions. The arrangement is not perfect and there are still arguments, but now the disagreements are solved through communication instead of fear. The outsiders prepare to leave. Before departing, their leader gives Ollie and Ivy a small crystal that contains a harmless trace of the energy they encountered. It is not powerful enough to control the magical network, but it can be used as a communication device between worlds. He promises that his people will remain in contact and share their progress. The two communities watch as the strange vessel disappears beyond the mountains. For the first time, the valley does not feel isolated. It feels connected to a much larger universe. Later, Ollie returns home and sits with Kalu. His father admits that he is proud of him, although he still wishes Ollie would think before acting. Ollie smiles and promises that he will try. Kalu then tells him that curiosity was never his real problem. The important thing was learning how to take responsibility for what his curiosity created. Ollie finally understands that his original mistake did not define him. What mattered was how he responded afterward. Ivy also returns to her community, where she is treated differently than before. The other Javans now respect her because she helped them understand the consequences of their actions. She is no longer simply trying to prove that she is strong or capable. She has learned that leadership is not about controlling others, it is about helping them make better decisions. She and Ollie continue meeting regularly, often traveling between the two territories and helping maintain the new agreement. One evening, Ollie and Ivy stand together overlooking the valley. The sunset fills the sky as the two friends remember how differently everything began. A simple encounter between a curious Puku and a Jawan turned into a conflict, a magical transformation, and an adventure that nearly destroyed their home. Yet, that same mistake eventually brought two communities together. Ollie realizes that if the body swap had never happened, he might never have understood Ivy's world. Ivy realizes that without becoming Ollie, she might never have understood how frightening life could be for smaller creatures. They both agree that they would never want to repeat the experience, but they would not erase what it taught them. As the camera moves away from the valley, the final scene reveals something beneath the ground. Deep inside the ancient roots, the magical network is completely dormant. The last remaining pod rests silently in darkness. For a moment, everything seems peaceful. Then the pod gives off one tiny flash of light. The screen cuts to black. The message of Swapped becomes clear. Differences do not have to create enemies, and understanding does not require becoming the same. Sometimes the only way to truly understand another person is to experience the world from their point of view. Ollie and Ivy began their journey believing that survival meant protecting their own side. They ended it realizing that real survival comes from balance, empathy, responsibility, and cooperation. Their bodies were swapped, but what truly changed was the way they saw each other.